For over a century, Blackwood Manor has swallowed its guests whole, leaving no trace behind. Just whispers of a sinister ritual that claims a new victim every decade. Now the time has come again, and as the chilling notes start to arrive, the current owner is forced to confront a horrifying truth. The manor is hungry, and this time, it wants him. The history of the manor. Rain hammered against the windows of Blackwood Manor, a sprawling ancient estate that had been in Robert Blackwood's family for generations. The manor's history was as twisted as its ivy-covered walls. Every decade, guests would disappear without a trace. No signs of struggle, no clues, just empty rooms. Robert, the current owner, had always dismissed the rumors as nothing more than urban legend, but now, the whispers had returned. Locals spoke of a ritual that demanded a new victim every 10 years, and the last disappearance had been exactly a decade ago. Robert had never believed in the supernatural, but when a cryptic letter arrived on his doorstep, that conviction started to waver. The chilling notes begin. Late one night, as Robert sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey, he heard the rustling of paper sliding under the door. He stood up and retrieved a note, the paper yellowed and brittle as if aged for decades. Written in a spidery hand was a single sentence: "Your time is coming. Prepare for the 10th." He looked outside, but the rain and fog swallowed the world beyond his front porch. Robert's heart raced. Who could have left the note? He tried to brush it off as a prank, but couldn't shake the growing unease. Why was the number 10 so prominent in the note? Echoes of the past. Determined to find out more, Robert delved into the manor's history. In the dusty library, he came across an old journal belonging to one of his ancestors, William Blackwood. The entries spoke of lavish parties held at the manor, but in hushed tones, they also hinted at a darker side, guests who vanished without explanation. One entry, dated precisely 100 years ago, mentioned a strange figure who had attended a gathering. He wasn't on the guest list, William wrote, and by morning, one of the guests was gone. The journal concluded with an unsettling phrase: "The price of keeping the house alive." Robert's skin crawled. Could it be connected to the disappearances? The house comes alive. That night, strange things started happening. Doors that Robert had locked swung open on their own. Shadows flickered in corners where no light should have reached. He tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was fatigue playing tricks on his mind. But then the messages began appearing more frequently, on mirrors, written in condensation after a hot shower, in his books, written in the margins as though someone had scrawled them long ago. 10 years is up. Robert could feel the house's presence, as if it were watching him, waiting for something. As the 10th anniversary of the last disappearance approached, Robert's paranoia grew. He invited his closest friends to stay for the weekend, hoping their presence would break the sinister spell. He told them nothing of the vanishing guests or the cryptic notes. If they knew, they'd surely think he had lost his mind. That evening, as the guests dined, the atmosphere in the manor felt heavy, oppressive. The storm outside raged, thunder rattling the windows. Unbeknownst to them, it was the same kind of storm that had ravaged the estate a decade ago, the night of the last disappearance. A guest vanishes. The next morning, one of Robert's guests, Emily, was missing. Her bed was made, her belongings untouched, but she was gone. Panic set in among the group. They scoured the manor, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. Robert felt a cold sweat drip down his back. The ritual, the vanishing, it was happening again. But why Emily? And why now? The dark revelation. The remaining guests, terrified, gathered in the grand hall demanding answers. Robert, pale and shaking, confessed everything: the history of the disappearances, the cryptic notes, the legend of the ritual. Some scoffed at the idea, but others believed him, their fear palpable. Suddenly, the air grew colder. The lights flickered, and the fire in the hearth extinguished itself. From the shadows, a figure appeared, a tall, gaunt man in a black coat. The same man described in William Blackwood's journal. "The ritual must be completed," the man said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "A sacrifice every 10 years. The house demands it. The final sacrifice." The figure moved toward Robert, his eyes hollow and hungry. "You are the last," he whispered, extending a bony hand. Robert's heart raced, his breath shallow. The house trembled as if alive, anticipating its offering. The guests screamed, scrambling toward the exits, but the doors slammed shut. The walls seemed to close in, trapping them inside. It was Robert who finally stepped forward, the realization sinking in. He was the sacrifice. The house had been preparing him for this moment all along. As the figure reached him, Robert felt the weight of generations pressing down on him. There was no escape. He had to give himself to the house. The vanishing. The next morning, the manor stood silent. The storm had passed, and the air was eerily still. When the authorities arrived, they found the manor empty, except for one room. Inside, a single note lay on the floor, written in that same spidery hand. The house is satisfied. For now. Robert and his guests had vanished without a trace, just as those before them. The legend would continue, whispered in the dark corners of the village, waiting for the next decade to claim its victims. The cycle would never end.